Hello and welcome to another Frontline Members Question and Answer. Now, it's been a couple of weeks since we've done this because the production team have been off doing other things in Greenland and elsewhere. And there's changes happening in Frontline Towers. We're now getting our own channel. So can I please ask all members to find our new Frontline and sign up for a new Frontline membership whenever it all comes online. I'll let you know. Because I think if you're on a subscription, it's a monthly subscription, and you just move across, and you'll stay with us and get all of our content early as you've enjoyed so far. But today I'm going to answer comments from you, our channel members, on the war in Ukraine, what we've covered in Frontline, and other videos, and look at its impact on the world stage. But with everything else that's going on in the world stage at the moment, Ukraine seems to have slipped off the headlines. As ever, I'm Philip Ingram. I present Times Radio Frontline, but I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer and global commentator on all matters security, cyber, terror, defence, war, and anything else that people ask me to do. So I'm going to get straight into your questions. First one comes from Raven, and Raven asks, why not get India and China pivoted to buying oil from Canada? Doesn't have to be forever, just time enough for Russia to be cut off at the knees. Russia forced to capitulate to peace. Brilliant idea. The trouble is the Canadians wouldn't want to sell their oil at the prices that the Russians are selling their oil. Russia is selling its oil at, it's got a fixed capped price that Russian oil can be sold at, but it's also having to offload it because of all the sanctions at up to $20 a barrel less than elsewhere. So if Canada tried to sell it, it would cripple the Canadian oil industry in doing that. I think better is what we're starting to see happen is greater sanctions being put on Russia's ability to move oil around the world. Greater sanctions being put on countries and businesses that are buying and refining Russian oil. And of course, the sanctions that the Ukrainians are imposing on the Russian oil infrastructure by destroying lots of it. And those are the ones that are having best effect. But yes, there needs to be more pressure put on. So the sentiment of your comment is quite accurate. Smart Gran, next comment from you. You say the longer Ukraine has to innovate and strengthen itself, the more likely we'll see a dead Putin and Ukraine liberated. Right. Well, Ukraine liberated. There's only about 20% of Ukraine that Russia occupies at the moment, and Ukraine is doing a fairly good job at beginning to push the Russians back. Innovation is something that is always a factor in warfare, whether it be a hot war like we're seeing in Ukraine or a cold war. And we have to remember that the Cold War between the West and Russia was won by the West through innovation. We out-innovated the Russians. It cost them, or the Soviets, it cost them an awful lot more to innovate to try and keep up with this, and they bankrupted themselves. Oh, what's happening with Ukraine and Russia? Ukraine is innovating. Russia is taking it and manufacturing it, but they're stealing it. It's costing them a lot more. They're having to mortgage themselves hugely to China and elsewhere. They're losing support like Iran because Iran's focused on other things. Whereas the West, as long as we stay with Ukraine, the financial backing that we can give is phenomenal. So we can out-innovate the Russians and therefore bankrupt the Russians in the same way that happened during the Cold War. And Ukraine, the final 20%, has to be liberated, and therefore I think it will be liberated. Next point comes from Marty. Marty say Hungary is a member of the EU, so they've been in the same position to delay, deny, stop any movement towards an EU-based army. Surely can only be from a coalition of nations with common interests to defend Europe, while not some others who are still licking Putin's boots. Marty, it's a really good point, and I'm glad you brought this up because there's an awful lot talked about an EU army, and it's those bureaucrats that are in the European Parliament that want to try and break themselves away from having national sovereignty. The militaries across Europe, even allocated to NATO, are under sovereign control, even when they're deployed in operations. There's always what's called the national red card. And we don't need an EU army because NATO has a plan on its shelf where it will bring the European members of NATO, and I include Canada in this, together for operations without the United States. That plan already exists. That's why the Deputy Supreme Commander is a British officer, because he will provide that bridge between European NATO and the United States, should the United States not come and play. I've been a planner in NATO. I've planned and exercised operations where we've done this, where we haven't involved the United States. And actually, in NATO, there's the ability for any or multiple nations to step aside. I remember as we planned our operations for going into Bosnia, the German Parliament didn't allow Germans to deploy anywhere. So all of the senior German officers in the multinational NATO headquarters I was in, Headquarters Allied Rapid Reaction Corps, were shadowed by a senior officer from another nation, just in case the German Parliament didn't change its mind. In the end, it did. But in the early days, we were sending non-Germans off to do reconnaissances on areas that a German officer should have been in. The same thing happens for the Americans. So it's not people who are commentating on it who don't know and haven't worked in NATO and haven't worked in Europe are building this up to being something that it really isn't, or it shouldn't be. And the politicians who want a greater federal Europe are the ones that are helping to stir the pot as well. Jay, next point from you, and you say it's rich that Zelensky has to prove that his staff changes are not corrupt to the most corrupt president in America's history. Zelensky has to prove so much to Donald Trump. Donald Trump seems to think that it was the Ukrainians that started the war. Well, 2014, the Russians illegally invaded Crimea and then stimulated the unrest in the eastern Donbass region. And in 2022, 4 years ago, almost at the beginning of the 5th year ago, Russia carried out its full-scale invasion. It is rich that Zelensky has to prove that it was the Russians what started it, and everything else that falls out of that, corruption, and that he is taking great care on the money that is being donated to him. We also have to remember that most of this money that's being donated to him isn't in cash. It's in goods and services, which are being manufactured in the United States and European countries. It just has a value, and that value is what hits the headlines because it's clickbait. Final point comes from Astro. And Astro, you say, Bill Browder continues to reiterate the sanctions against 8 refineries in China, India and Turkey, and that would cut daily infusion from $500 million from between $500 million to $1 billion in Putin's war chest. Trump pretends not to know things when it suits him and his investors. Astro, as ever, you're right. Trump is focused on what seems to be financial outputs, and whether it's for the United States, I question some of the decisions he's making. Whether it's for other people who are going to gain financially from it, well, someone's doing it. So we just have to watch and see. But yes, Donald Trump is someone that is focused on the deal. So again, thanks for watching this week's question and answer and posting your questions. Remember, if you want exclusive access to our videos and get them answered, or get your questions answered, please sign up for our membership. And remember, membership, look for the Frontline channel. It did have a little bit of time on a channel called the Trump Report, but we're now on Frontline. We're also on Times Radio overnight at 01:35 hours Greenwich Mean Time, and that, I think, is 20:35 hours Eastern Standard Time if you're in the United States. You can add your own time differences in for wherever you are. But please keep watching, and thank you for your continued support. Goodbye.